I've said this before, but when it comes to healing from trauma, we can't just put the pieces back together. We have to put the shattered pieces in a new way that's more resilient. So how do we do that? Well, today on the podcast, we're going to talk about how trauma fragments the psyche and how to heal. Have you ever been to a pottery class where you take this big lump of clay and then you start to form it and mold it and eventually you get something beautiful? If you haven't listened to that one, go back and check it out. It's a really important part of understanding how trauma fragments us and specifically what happens to our nervous system. I'm using the word psyche here to refer to the human mind, which is a combination of our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, memories, beliefs, and motivations. Trauma fractures these things and scatters them like pieces of a puzzle. Let me explain. I will say, though, that you can absolutely listen to that one and then come back to this one. When we experience a traumatic event, our brains make an announcement that there is danger lurking in the environment, and our bodies respond accordingly. After experiencing trauma, we may struggle with feelings of shame, guilt, or self-blame. After experiencing trauma, we may become more guarded and detached in our relationships, fearing that others may try to hurt us. We may also avoid social situations that remind us of the traumatic event or trigger our anxiety. It's actually more common for trauma to be the result of a series of adverse experiences that occur over time. Healing from trauma is not a linear process, and it's essential to approach it with patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to confront difficult emotions. This approach can help individuals to connect with their body, release trapped trauma energy, and develop a sense of safety and groundedness in their physical body. These practices can help individuals to develop a greater sense of self-awareness, emotional regulation, and resilience. It's essential to explore different approaches and find what works best for you. If you're a survivor of trauma, you don't need to get better. You need to get whole. There's a difference. Getting better implies that something is wrong with you and needs to be fixed, implying that there is something broken inside of you that needs to be made better. But that's not the case. Nothing is wrong with you. Something happened to you. And the goal isn't to fix what's wrong with you, but to restore wholeness to your life. Wholeness means acknowledging all parts of yourself, including the wounded parts. It means accepting yourself exactly as you are and giving yourself permission to feel whatever you're feeling without judgment. Wholeness is freedom. It's the ability to choose how you want to live your life and set boundaries around what you will and won't tolerate from others. Be patient with yourself and celebrate your progress along the way. One of the most effective approaches to healing from trauma is through therapy with a trauma-informed therapist. Therapy provides a safe and supportive space to process the trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms. Trauma-informed therapy takes an approach that recognizes the widespread impact of trauma and its potential effects on a person's life. A trauma-informed therapist understands that trauma survivors may have difficulty trusting authority figures, forming close relationships or regulating their emotions, and they will tailor the therapeutic approach to accommodate these challenges. By understanding how trauma fragments the psyche, we can take steps to heal and become whole. Thank you for listening to episode 27 of the Anxiety Slayer podcast. I hope that you found this information helpful. And please remember that you matter. Your story matters and you deserve to heal. Some forms of therapy that are particularly effective for treating trauma include cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps identify and modify negative thought patterns and behaviors in eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing, which involves tracking eye movements while recalling traumatic memories in order to reprocess and integrate the traumatic experience. For example, growing up in a dysfunctional family with one or both parents who are struggling with addiction, depression, anxiety, or other mental health challenges can be incredibly traumatic for a child. It can cause a lot of these same responses and impacts to our psyche, brain, and body. As a result, we may isolate ourselves and become further disconnected from others. We may ask ourselves questions like, why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Experiencing trauma can have a significant impact on our physical health. The stress hormones released during a traumatic event can weaken our immune system, making us more susceptible to illness. Additionally, trauma can manifest physically as chronic pain, fatigue, insomnia, digestive issues, and other ailments. Or maybe I should have been able to handle this situation better. These negative thoughts can cause us to fragment our identity. By separating ourselves from the traumatic event and denying or minimizing what happened to us, we may start to believe that we are less than or broken because of the trauma. Under extreme stress, Our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for rational thought and decision-making, shuts down and instead redirects all of its energy to survival functions. In order to survive the traumatic event, our brains essentially prioritize immediate safety over rational thought. This means that we may not be able to fully process the trauma in the moment or make logical decisions about how to respond. Instead, we rely on instinct and autopilot. Our heart starts racing. Our breathing becomes more rapid and shallow, and we enter into a heightened state of alertness and arousal. During a traumatic event, our brains are flooded with stress hormones, such as cortisol and adrenaline, which impair our ability to form coherent memories. These traumatic memories can become fragmented, incomplete, or distorted, making it difficult for us to accurately recall the event. Our brain kind of edits out certain details in order to protect us from the overwhelming emotions associated with the trauma. So these traumatic memories often get stored in our body as sensory experiences and sensations. And instead of remembering the event itself, we might remember feeling terrified or hopeless or unsafe. We may also experience a range of intense emotions such as fear, anxiety, helplessness, panic, and terror. These fight, flight, freeze responses are meant to protect us from harm, and they can actually keep us stuck in a constant state of hypervigilance. They aren't consecutive episodes, but they are connected. It's so interesting because this piece of pottery is formed from something that was once broken down and fragmented. But the key difference between the pottery and many of us is that with the pottery, that's the end goal. You start broken and you end whole. With us, it's kind of the opposite. We start whole, and then life happens, and we break into fragments. And the goal is not to put ourselves back together like that pottery, but to use those shards and build something even stronger, more beautiful, and more whole than we were before. This is episode 27 of the Anxiety Slayer podcast. Hi, I'm the Anxiety Slayer. My mission is to help you become trauma-free so you can feel safe in your body again. And if you're new here, welcome. I would love it if you subscribed. Now let's get into the episode. It can include emotional, psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, witnessing violence, combat, natural disasters, accidents, being in a car crash, and even things like prolonged grief or loss. All of these events can be traumatic. We know that trauma fragments us, and in my last episode I talked about how trauma changes the way our brain processes emotions and the nervous system responds to perceived threats. When I'm talking about trauma, I'm referring to any kind of overwhelming experience that evokes an intense level of fear. So now that we know what trauma is, let's get into how trauma fragments the psyche. The first way trauma fragments the psyche is by disrupting our sense of safety and security. The second way that trauma fragments the psyche is by hijacking our ability to process and regulate emotions. The third way that trauma fragments the psyche is by altering our memory. The fourth way that trauma fragments the psyche is by altering our sense of identity and self-esteem. The fifth way that trauma fragments the psyche is by altering our relationships and social connections. And the sixth way that trauma fragments the psyche is by altering our physical health. So these are the 6 ways that trauma fragments the psyche. But I want to emphasize that trauma doesn't have to be a single event. Now that we understand how trauma fragments our psyche, let's talk about how we can heal. Another approach that can be helpful in healing from trauma is somatic experiencing, which focuses on the body's role in healing from trauma. In addition to therapy, engaging in self-care practices such as mindfulness, meditation, and yoga can also be beneficial in managing trauma symptoms. It's also important to recognize that healing from trauma is not a one-size-fits-all process. What works for one person may not work for another. But I want to say something that's really important here. Healing from trauma is possible, and it's a journey worth taking.